Former UK Prime Minister Liz Truss calls for a Trump-style revolution over here. More Jeffrey Epstein files that don't exist apparently are released, and China unveils brand new nuclear weapons, among other things. That plus more in today's Trending. Well, good morning everybody, wherever you are in the world. I hope you're well. Officially summer's ended here in the UK. It's absolutely miserable this morning as you're coming in. Rain, wind, horrible. So thank God we had such a good summary. Right, Liz Truss, former Prime Minister, the shortest serving Prime Minister in British history, has called for a Trump-style revolution in the UK after blaming the Bank of England for her downfall. Now, this story is an interesting one because a lot of what she says you can agree with and you can appreciate and you can understand. However, she's either incredibly ignorant, which wouldn't surprise me, and just goes to show how high you can get in politics without actually understanding and knowing the full picture, or she knows exactly what she's doing and she's leaving certain bits of information out of what she's talking about. So for people around the world, and for anyone in the UK that needs a refresher, Liz Truss took over from Boris Johnson. She wasn't the choice that the Conservative Party, the MPs wanted, but she was the party choice from the members, if you like. So she beat Rishi Sunak to become the Prime Minister. Her whole premise was called Trussonomics, which was basically a trickle-down economy. You have lower taxes at the higher end, and therefore that leads businesses to spend more, to invest more, to hire more, and that money is passed down through into people across the country. So she slashed income tax. She got rid of the higher rate band of tax at 45%. She lowered VAT, I believe. She looked at national insurance, various different things, and she did a mini budget not long after she took over with her Chancellor at the time, Kwasi Kwarteng. Now, what that mini budget did is it essentially cut the tax budget or the tax receipt budget by £45 billion. And after that, they claimed that was unfunded. There was no plan as to how that money was going to be made from other sources or how it was going to be made by cutting certain services to save that money. And then chaos ensued. There was a run on the pound. The Bank of England went absolutely crazy. The markets went crazy. And as a result, she was forced to backtrack. Kwasi Kwarteng lost his job. Was replaced by Jeremy Hunt, who's had about every single job going in the cabinet over the years, from health secretary, foreign secretary, pretty much everything. And he did his very best to destroy the NHS during his time in charge there. And basically, he reversed pretty much everything. And then she was obviously gone not too far later. And but for the death of the Queen, Elizabeth II, in the middle of her premiership, she probably would have gone sooner. But obviously, because of that, the country was quite chaotic at the time, and she probably ended up holding onto her seat for a little bit longer than she would have done. She then lost her seat as an MP completely in the last election. But basically, what she's talking about here, you can understand and you can appreciate. She did an interview a few weeks ago, which I watched with Andrew Gold, where she talked about basically not even being the Prime Minister and how you are nowhere near as powerful as people, are led to believe you are, and you are influenced and you have other organisations and other entities, whether it be the military and others, influencing your decisions. I mean, how many TV programmes and TV series have we watched where there is insiders within either the military or civil service or other government departments that run a coup against the leader? I've watched one this week, actually, one called Hostage, which you can find on, I think it's on Netflix. And that's where the Prime Minister in this particular series is cutting the military budget. And there's then a coup from within the military, senior commanders, to get rid of her. You've seen this situation on shows and on films. Do you really think it doesn't happen in real life? Of course it does. So in this case, it was the Bank of England that got rid of Liz Truss. So this is the story. Liz Truss has defended her record as Prime Minister and called for an institutional change in Britain in the same way she claims Donald Trump is delivering in the US. Now, this is where her argument falls apart, because Donald Trump is not delivering that in the US. What he's delivering in the US is total chaos for the benefit of a very few. Not many. I guarantee if you speak to most objective American citizens about Trump's premiership, not the extreme MAGA and not the extreme on the other end, the people sort of somewhere in the middle that just want to get on with their lives, they're not better off under Trump. It's very chaotic. They don't know where they stand, especially people who are running businesses because of these tariffs that are there. They're not there. Then we've got to move manufacturing back. Oh no, they've dropped the tariffs now. It's all very chaotic. So that is where me and her would massively disagree. But what she's described is that she wasn't the captain of the ship during this period. So what she's described essentially is that the Bank of England were the ones dictating terms.
You were captain of the ship. We'd had a decade and a half of very low rates, juiced further by an enormous amount of borrowing during the pandemic. And I would argue anyone involved in the markets knew that our finances were in a perilous state. So you have to gauge how much of a risk you take with them. And to say, the LDI problem wasn't my fault would be like the captain of the Titanic saying, it's not my fault that there are icebergs out there.
You said I was captain of the ship. The fact is I wasn't captain of the ship because I wasn't running monetary policy. The Bank of England were running monetary policy. I'm very happy to take responsibility for things, provided I have the full ability to actually control them. I didn't have the ability to control them. The fact is, the Bank of England, whereas they go out of their way to support what Rachel Reeves is doing, and you can see that with things like the interest rate cut, even though inflation was going up, they went out of their way to blame me.
Now, you can apply this to lots of different situations and lots of different organisations, but in this case it's the Bank of England, because the decisions that she made when she first took over were very much financial and economic decisions, and therefore the Bank of England were the ones that had the influence. She said, the last time I looked, it's the Prime Minister who is democratically accountable to the people of the country, not the Bank of England. The Bank of England's role is to work with the government to ensure financial stability. And that's not what they were doing. They were pushing their own agenda. Now, this is very key to dive into, because when she says that they're pushing their own agenda, well, what is the agenda? What is the agenda of a bank? Because you can look and say, very simply, banks are independent institutions. They should operate under their own premise, and they should have their own, agenda to try and make as much money as possible. That's what you would expect a bank to say their agenda is: to make as much money as possible and to be sustainable and to be there forever and all that. Yet clearly, it's not that, because if you think about it from this perspective, just to go on a little economic journey for a second. If people have more money in their pocket, they're spending more money. If people are spending more money, there's more money going into the economy. There's more money being deposited in banks. Therefore, there's more money for banks to lend more money because of fractional reserve lending. They can lend 10 times what they have on deposit. So for every £10 you pay into the bank can lend 100. So if people have more money in their pocket, that money is going to be going into the banks that then banks can use to lend more for investments and so on. So in theory, Trussonomics plan of lowering taxes for businesses, lowering taxes for working people are going to end up with more money in their pocket, and therefore, as a result, that's going to benefit the banks. More people are going to be able to buy houses, which is going to mean mortgages, which is going to be more money for the banks. Yet the fact that that's not what happened, or the fact that that wasn't even what was discussed, it was just straight away, this is dreadful. And there was a run on the pound and all of that, which then created the chaos that got rid of her. I see two aspects to this. So let's just stick with the economic one for a second. You could look at that and say, well, that's good for the banks. The scenario I've just described, people having more money. You can also go to the other end of the spectrum and go, well, people having no money is good for the banks. Because if people have mortgages and you don't pay your mortgage, the bank repossess your house. If you have businesses and you have debts, the bank will repossess your assets. You're more reliant on the system. You're more beholden to the banks. You have cars on finance, you stop paying, they'll take your car, your mobile phone, your sofas, your kitchen appliances, all those things that people now for some reason seem to get on credit. Well, when you can't pay that back because the system is beating you to death with the tax and cost of living sticks, all of a sudden then, the bank benefit in a different way. And also, that ties in to the greater agenda, which is to make people poorer, weaker, and more reliant on the system. So that's one aspect. The other aspect, from a political perspective, is it's very clear that Keir Starmer was the chosen one to be in charge at this time. Very, very clear that he was the chosen one to be in charge at this time. Liz Truss, as much as I disagree with much of what she says, she would have been a clear difference, a clear alternative to Labour. And also there would have been a time between her premiership and the election for these policies to potentially start to benefit people financially. Therefore, come the election, there would have been a clear decision for people to make, this or this. Whereas when she lost her place as Prime Minister and was replaced by Rishi Sunak, which is who the Conservative MPs wanted all along, that was gone. Because back it went to the same policies that had been in place through that whole Conservative 14 years. And it meant that when the next election came, Labour were guaranteed a landslide win. Keir Starmer didn't win that election because he's popular. He got less votes than Jeremy Corbyn did in 2015. The difference is he was considered the only alternative because people wanted the Tories gone. So he didn't win the election. The Conservatives lost it. Let's make that extremely clear. For anyone that thinks Labour have a huge mandate, they've got 9 million votes. They really don't. They really don't. 9 million of 72 million people. They really don't have a mandate of any description worth the paper it's written on. So what's very clear is that there was multiple aspects to this, to wanting to get rid of her. Financially, as I mentioned there, also the fact that politically it guaranteed that the next election was going to go the way of Labour, which it did. And also it furthers the cult's agenda to make humanity dependent on the state. You look at since Truss was in charge, you look at the decline of people's living standards, you look at the increase of the cost of living, you look at the increase of the expense of just about everything. You look at the increase in your taxes, the increase in your weekly shop, in your fuel payments, in your bills, your electricity, your gas. All of those things have increased, yet there's not been a run on the pound. And that's what's very clear. Economically, we are in a more dangerous position now than we were under her. So Labour claimed when they took over there was a £22 billion black hole in public finances. Now, to explain what that means, essentially there was £22 billion worth of expenses that were not legislated for. They were not costed. Now, I don't know about you, I can't spend £10 unless I've got it, yet apparently £22 billion is fine. Now, this number is important because, one, it's a complete fabrication, because Labour had access, as all parties do in the lead up to an election, have access to all these financial documents and financial information. So when they then took over and then said, oh, we didn't know about this, that's rubbish. The reason they've come out and said that is because that's then given them the justification to do exactly what they were always going to do, which is raise taxes. Because they got elected saying they weren't going to do that. So they needed a scenario and an environment where they could go back on that decision. So they create a bogeyman, a fake narrative of £22 billion black hole, and you can go, look, I didn't want to do it, guys, but we didn't have all the facts, and I'm afraid, the Tories, again, we can do this. Which is complete BS, and anyone that's looked at it for more than a second or two will know it's complete BS. Well, that black hole, if you believe it existed, is over double now in this Labour government than it was when they took over. How does that work then? How does that work then? So they've raised taxes, they've then spent a load of money irrelevantly on climate catchers, on more ridiculous green infrastructure policies like this UK green energy. They've housing migrants once again. They've pledged to increase defence spending. They have they've basically spent money in so many areas except where it needs to go, and also they've spent more than they have. And again, as I said, me and you can't do that. If me and you can't afford something, you don't do it. No one's coming to bail us out. You just lose your house, you'd lose your car, you'd lose your business. The difference is they do what they want. You can't run a business, which essentially from a financial perspective a government is. You can't run a business £50 billion in deficit. You can't do that. That's called insolvency, guys. That's insolvent. You're bringing in significantly less than you're spending. You can't do that. You're bankrupt. Hence why lots of councils like Birmingham, the biggest one in the country, have gone bankrupt recently, and others are very, very close to that line. Labour, I'll add, because of mismanagement. It's as simple as that. If you cannot afford something, you can't do it. I can't walk into a car dealership now and go, I want that Aston Martin, please. Well, sorry, sir, you can't afford it. Well, that's fine. $2,000 a month. No, I'll sort it out. It's fine. Don't worry about it. Just stick it on credit. Even though I can't afford it, that's not going to work. But governments can go out and spend money that they don't have, pass that burden on to the taxpayer. And what's ironic, and it would be funny if it wasn't so tragic and sad, is that increase in spending never seems to benefit the people. If we were charged 50% tax, let's say, but everything was absolutely brilliant, streets were safe, food was cheap, energy was cheap, and you ended up with more money at the end of the month than you do right now, people would probably go, I can live with that. I don't want it. I don't like it, but I can live with it because I'm getting something for it. Whereas instead, what's happening is you're being charged more and more and more and more and getting less and less and less and less. That's absolutely insane and absolutely unjustifiable and unsustainable for so many reasons. Hence why this Labour government is in massive, massive trouble. But the reason that this subject is so important is because most people don't understand the basics of these type of things, and the governments and the chancellors and the finance analysts and all that on the news will use very long words to make it sound like they know what they're talking about, when really what they're doing is they're doing it to try and confuse you and make you think, oh, it's way above my pay grade. I don't understand that. What's GDP mean? What does economics even mean? What does the deficit mean? It's absolutely insane. The point that there is a deficit highlights the problem. The amount of money that is wasted by governments, some deliberately, some just by inefficiency and poor management, is absolutely astonishing. You take a massive beast like the NHS, for example. We've spoke to whistleblower after whistleblower that's talking about a variety of things, from cover-ups, negligence, and a lot of it is also about the massive overspending and mismanagement of finances in certain areas that's leading to probably billions being wasted over the years and yearly. Because these people will talk about individual cases at individual hospitals. We'll times that by how many hospitals and trusts there are. All of a sudden, that's an enormous number. The amount of middle managers that don't need to be there, that don't actually do anything. The amount of stuff that goes through the civil service that's ideological rather than beneficial to the population. It's ideologically taking the country in a certain direction, whether that be green energy, whether that be open borders, whatever it might be. This is the situation that we are in. What Liz Truss is essentially describing is the permanent government. She's describing the permanent government that is always there, no matter who is elected. And that would be the Bank of England in the case she's describing. That would be the military personnel. That would be the civil service. That would be the senior NHS staff. That would be your senior economic business leaders and advisors. That would be other areas of the health industry, the pharmaceutical companies, and so on, that are always in power. And no matter who is elected, whether it's right wing, whether it's left wing, the same agenda continues, albeit at different paces sometimes, but the same agenda continues. That's because behind the scenes, the permanent government remains the same. Nothing proves that more than what we're seeing here. As I mentioned there, Liz Truss did the mini budget, and there was £45 billion of tax cuts, which they say were unfunded, and that's what led to the run on the pound. Labour, right now, are in a similar, if not slightly worse position in the sense of unfunded spends. Now, the difference I'll add is Truss got in trouble for cutting taxes. So that 45 billion was from cutting taxes. The Labour increase is not through that, because they've raised taxes. It's through increased spending, which is even more insane when you think about it like that. Because again, that increase in spending doesn't benefit the 60 or 70 million people that are in this country that they are meant to represent. However, The fact that they're in the same position, and is there a run on the pound today? Are the Bank of England making emergency announcements in front of Mansion House on the BBC? Is there calls for Starmer and so on to resign, to kick out because of this? There's people that don't like Starmer and there's people that don't like Rachel Reeves, obviously, but it's mainly from the position of increasing taxes, the public. Most people don't even know that the deficit is now higher than it was under Liz Truss and when all that chaos ensued. Most people don't know that because your media are not telling you that. Because the media are another part of this. They're another part of that permanent government. And that permanent government want Labour in charge right now. They didn't want Liz Truss in charge, so they got rid of her by creating an absolute shitstorm surrounding her, caused by the Bank of England, caused by the media. Because their man's in charge now, they're happy with that for now. And don't worry, they'll get rid of him at some point too. Whether it be through stories similar to this or whether it be through Ukrainian rent boys and all of that coming out. It's going to come out. Something is, because that's just sat there on the back burner waiting for when Starmer's no longer useful. But the point is, why is there no uproar? Why is there not a situation where people are calling out exactly the same situation as they were when Liz Truss? Because they don't know about it. And that just proves just how controlled all of this is. And when she says she wasn't captain of the ship, she wasn't running monetary policy, she's absolutely right. She's absolutely right. And she says here, just to finish, she says, my mistake, if you want to put it like that, is underestimating the sheer malevolence of the economic blob in Britain. Very true. Now, I don't agree with anything else she said about her solutions for this. And as I said at the top, this just goes to show she's either incredibly ignorant to the bigger picture, which wouldn't surprise me, because you can get very high up in government if you just say the right thing without actually knowing the bigger picture, or she knows what the bigger picture and her role, if you like, may become more prevalent as we get closer to the next election, whether she joins Reform or something else, or whether she becomes, a more important figure in politics once again, as far as the public are concerned. But either way, it's a very interesting article because it describes from the inside exactly what we have been talking about when we say that the elected officials are not the one calling the shots. It's the permanent government behind the scenes that dictate policy. And that's why anyone who stands up and does something slightly different, they will get kicked out very quickly, like Liz Truss has done. And that's why most of the time, no matter the rhetoric coming out of the party, the same agenda continues because they are working for the same side and the same permanent government. Right, if you're watching with us on social media, then if you click the link in the description below and you'll head over to iconic.com to watch the rest of the episode for free. I apologise for Monday, I should have made that a lot clearer. The reason we're doing that is because we know one day these channels are just not going to exist for us, and it's very important that we try and remove complete reliance on them. So if you head over to iconic.com, just all you got to do is put your email address in and you can watch the show for free every single day and tons of other stuff. Now, the reason we're doing that, as I said, is to remove that reliance on those social media platforms that have already deleted us once. This is our second YouTube channel. We've got the first one back for now, but for how long? We have to deal with shadow banning left, right and centre, so we definitely don't want to have everything on those platforms. So one day they just remove us and we've lost the ability to talk to you. So if you jump in, you put your email in, you can watch the show for free. And what that means is when inevitably that day comes when these channels don't exist for us, is we're still able to contact you and give you, access to these programs moving forward. Otherwise, there's no way we would be able to do that in future. We just essentially disappear into the background, which nobody wants. So head over and watch the show for free. If you love what we do and you're liking the content and you want to see more of it, start your first month for $1.99 and you can access everything we have on Iconic, and there's a lot more coming very soon. So head over now if you click the link in the description, and I'll see you over there.